and I'd like to introduce Brian Rousell from Shoreham Port, who's going to be talking to us about the work that they've done on LIDP, Shoreham Port Industrial Cluster. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks very much, Steve, and thanks for having me along. So I'm going to run you through, as Steve said, our local industrial cluster decarbonisation plan. That's not often I get that out first time in a winner, but this was essentially a year-long project that is kind of summarised here in a fairly simple graphic on the right, and I'm going to sort of zip through some slides that relate directly to that and some of the stuff that we've done in association with the plan as well. So we've already heard about the program from Innovate UK that was set up to follow the 6 main industrial clusters with the 13 smaller sites. And we were fortunate to have been one of the successful bids for that plan to receive the funding, and I was very pleased earlier to hear that we were described on one of the slides as an exemplar or best practice case study of one of these plans. So we couldn't have done this without our partners. We've had a number of kind of really key partners in the development of the plan. And also I just wanted to point out that we have our kind of port values in the top right of the screen here. 2 of which are particularly valid here, which are trusted custodians. We aim to leave the port better than we found it and look after our environment, and open doors, which is very much about being transparent about what we're doing, about inviting the community and stakeholders to see what we're doing. But the other key partners are kind of some of our main industrial tenants, our local authority partners, both Ada and Worthing and West Sussex, and Brighton Hove City Council, because we span the border. The academic and knowledge dissemination support from University of Sussex, who we've had a long-standing relationship with, and then our leading consultancy, Ricardo, just up the road at the airport, who have done the kind of main body, the number crunching and the data processing and the model building for this project. And as Harley pointed out, it is a great opportunity to liaise with local organisations and bring them all together. So the work was split into 3 packages. There was the primary research, which was a data gathering exercise. We compiled and distributed a survey amongst our tenants and stakeholders to relevant parties, and that really was a kind of quite a task to chase up and follow up on those, but we got a good response, as we'll see later on. Work package 2, as I've mentioned, was largely the work of Ricardo, who have got fantastic knowledge in depth and were able to really kind of look at both demand generation, opportunity, all the kind of the modeling of what goes on both on the port and in the immediate vicinity, and how we can pull that together in a industrial cluster. And then University of Sussex were delivering the knowledge capture and dissemination. They've been successful in getting a number of papers published, which we'll look at later on. And it was really a kind of thrust of Innovate UK's that there is learning that's spread wider from these clusters to the sort of wider industry. As I've said already, it's essentially a year-long program. Although the bid started in the summer of 23, we were actually successfully awarded this successful towards the end of that year, and then really got going in the January of 2024. The work kind of trundled on through there. As I say, the surveys were done in the first 6 months, and that was a real strong push to get that done. Following right through to the publication of the plan in February 25 this year, when the final report was published. So there's a link to the plan later on, you can see that itself. But also I just wanted to point out there was an opportunity that we seized on to engage with other industrial clusters as well. One great example of that was Poole, just relatively down the road from us, Poole Harbour, and we kind of joined in with their events, they joined in with ours, and kind of meant it was a meaningful engagement, and that kind of knowledge dissemination as well as giving people the opportunity to see what we do here at Shoreham. So I've talked a bit about how much effort went into the survey. There were two, we split it into two because we realized we couldn't ask the right kind of scale of questions to everybody. So we had our kind of smaller organizations and SMEs, of which we have a huge number around the port, and then a more specific one for our sort of larger industrial tenants, as we call them. So the organizations like Barrett Steel, Cemex, Local Fuels, and that kind of seemed to work pretty well. As Chris said earlier, it does take chasing, but we got a good response rate in the end. We had an intern in the team to do that work, which was a huge help. And I think it helped that we pitched it as that slogan says in the middle, help us plan for a greener future. We sort of leveraged our open doors value to really kind of get people involved and sort of make them feel like part of the team that we're trying to deliver something. So I've talked a little bit about how many we've got, around 175 tenants directly on the port, but then there's a lot more businesses based in and around the area. And a lot of those are SMEs, and something that Innovate UK definitely wanted to do with this kind of plan project was to enable companies and sizes of businesses that otherwise wouldn't be producing these sort of plans to get involved in this decarbonisation journey. And although the port employs just under 200 colleagues altogether, you can see there's well over 1,500 direct jobs on the port. That was a great result to find out from our survey, that we'd always suspected that but didn't actually know it. But there's many more thousands of jobs connected to the port's activities as well. So I think that was something that was good to learn. It was a little bit of a surprise to us how many. I think even though we recognise that we're one of the England's, I think the third largest fishing port in England for landings, the largest scallop landing port for the last few years in the UK. But to see the number of jobs in the cold light of day that are involved in fishing. And again, these are people that wouldn't be looking at decarbonisation. They're working on very low margins, as are some of our bigger tenants too. And a lot of it is also kind of transport and logistics related. So they're low margin industries. They're not people that have got necessarily decarbonisation at the top of their list of jobs to do. But by bringing them all together under this umbrella, hopefully we can start to do that. The work package 2, so the work done by Ricardo in building the model, analysing the data, was a bigger piece of work than any of us thought, I think, in the end. And as you can kind of look at an overview of this screen, there is no silver bullet. There's no single answer. There's no one solution to decarbonisation. And as Connor said earlier, with HVO, the additional cost is a hurdle for some people, but it is the thing that gives a huge instant saving on carbon emissions. So we now run all our non-road mobile machinery, which is the NRMM at the top there, on HVO, and a proportion of our own HGV fleet, road going fleet as well, are now all running on HVO, as well as our tugs and most of our floating craft. But also there's a need to, as well as looking at all these alternative fuels, we've kind of looked at it for the view of reducing the demand for some of these kind of legacy fuel sources. So for example, our let office at the east end of the port, Maritime House, is now heated by a marine source heat pump, which is powered by green electricity. So that got rid of an oil burning boiler, which was putting out, I think we estimated 70 tons a year of CO2. So you've got to kind of think laterally as well with these decarbonisation plans. I think was something that we learnt. When we looked at the emissions, we picked 2023 as our baseline, and you can see that a relatively small amount of this is used by the port, but that's something that we have direct influence over. And then we're trying to really pull in these other industrial tenants, and eventually when you get into scope 3, You're looking at the kind of third-party vehicles, vessels, where a large chunk of emissions comes from their auxiliary engines when they're at berth. So I'll talk a little bit more about our berth zero scheme, which was finished just in the first part of this year. But a lot of the vast majority of these emissions on this thing are all with HGVs, and they are making back to base trips, relatively short and frequent trips around the area. So they are a kind of an ideal target to aim at for either battery electric, hydrogen fuel cell, or and in the meantime the HVO to kind of bring those emissions down. A number of pathways, 4 pathways were sort of modelled to look at where they go and how we achieve those emissions reductions. The do nothing scenario obviously doesn't achieve net zero in any way, but it's our sort of control measure that we were judging the others by, and then looking at varying degrees of how much uptake there is on HVO, how many vehicles and vessels are electrified, and kind of what we're doing to minimise that demand, particularly for the fossil fuel burning things. And that's been hugely helped with our partners at Local Fuels, who've recently rebranded as Southern Energy, because obviously they're keen to they know which way their industry is going, and they're keen to be involved in the transition as well. So one thing that this brings forward is that we need to look at developing. We already have a reasonable amount of solar and wind on the port, but we need to be looking to really grow this out if we're going to start supplying energy and electricity, green electricity, to all these energy hungry sources. So you can see on the left we've got our existing renewables, and what we think we can achieve over the next kind of 10 years on the kind of alternative. What we need to do is, for electricity generation, if we're going to go for the alternative fuel scenarios, or if we're going to go for full electrification, you're looking at what we got on the right there. So another massive chunk of renewables and solutions with battery storage, maybe even flywheels, all these kind of technologies that are looking at how we utilize the green energy on the port. We currently have a reasonable amount. Most of that existing supply is solar, rooftop solar. We've got capacity for plenty more on our sheds, and we have 2 small wind turbines, but we think we've got a realistic chance of getting a much expanded wind array, onshore wind array down the port, which would really kind of take a massive chunk out of that required 18.2 megawatts that we're talking about in terms of capacity at the port if we're going to electrify everything. Whatever happens, we're going to have to keep close to the DNO, has been mentioned already, I know, because you've got to be looking at the balance of import and export of electricity when you're starting to get into bigger renewables. So I think I mentioned that a number of papers have been published. The one that they were particularly pleased with was the one that got into Nature Reviews Clean Technology. That's got a massive readership, and there are others not listed here as well, but it was a really concerted effort from the University of Sussex to kind of try and contextualize what we were doing across the wider LIDP program and within the sort of port industry as well. So it was great to kind of have those academic minds sort of applying themselves to what we were trying to do and spread that news. So this was the kind of summary, very high level summary of kind of how the University of Sussex team kind of looked at the outputs, or the kind of where that knowledge dissemination has to go. And really we're looking at solving global problems, but on a local scale, and it's got to be place-based. It's got to be, I think it's a bit of an overused phrase these days, but it's got to be something that is relevant to where it's happening, and in the right scale, the right proportions, and with the right kind of resources. So this one is our kind of emission reduction waterfall. It's probably a bit small on the screen for a lot of people, but really what we're looking at here is kind of projects and chunks of emissions that we're tackling in different ways. And the top one on top green on the left, Birth Zero, I'm going to talk a little bit more in a second, but you can see that HGVs in the middle of the screen if we're going to start converting them to HVO and battery electric, that's where we really start to make the big gains, because we have over 800 lorries a day coming in and out of the port in a busy period. So it's, and as I said earlier, a lot of them are short trips and back to base. So a kind of real opportunity to kind of really start to bring down those emissions. And then we get into other kind of much smaller opportunities, but ones that we can keep chipping away at over the next, the period of the next 10-15 years. The final plan, we've got a QR code on the screen here for anybody who wants to read it. It's a reasonably lengthy but very digestible document in the end, I think, that was produced, and kind of goes into a little bit more detail behind all these things I've been talking about here. And we published it on the 24th. We had a little celebration, which Steve was a member of the party that came and helped us celebrate the launch of our plan. And we walked along to Birth Zero, which was our kind of plug-in shore power scheme, which I have a slide on in just a second. But for those who can't do the QR screen, there's a link there on the screen as well to our website, which has a copy of the plan on it too. So yeah, it's all very well having a plan, but then what are you going to do to deliver it? And this is if you like, a shopping list of things that we've either started or are very kind of focused on at the moment. The HVO expansion, looking at electric vehicles. We've had the main picture with some of our sustainability team there, and as well is the new Mercedes E-Actros, which we came and got all our drivers to have a go at, look at how it kind of works in reality, and it kind of really, I think it made it feel a lot more realistic to a lot of people, than just something that we talk about in the background, because it was actually there, it was silent, it did the job that we needed it to, and it was really good to see. But also I'll pick out CMDC 6 there, which is the Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition. We've got 3 bids in at the moment for that funding, which will all be demonstrators, including decarbonising our tugs with an innovative steam generator turbine project, looking at storage of our biggest electricity use in our pump house, and other schemes there where we're looking to try and get some additional funding to help us sort of accelerate down that route. So Birth Zero, I've mentioned a few times now, and it's something that we were fortunate to receive funding from the MMO, or DEFRA, Marine Management Organisation, as part of their UK Seafood Infrastructure Fund. The main picture on the right, you can see there, is that we, as I mentioned, we're an active scallop landing port, so all those beam trawlers are largely scallopers. And when we have a full suite of 10 to 12 trawlers berthed along by the power station there, they're all running on auxiliary engines, and some of the bigger ones are burning 200 litres of diesel every 24 hours while they're sat there just on their auxiliaries. So with a significant investment from us and the grant funding, we've installed a new substation, 11,000 volt substation towards the quay, and then 5 double-headed plug-in pillars on the quay edge, so that these trawlers can plug in shore power, turn off those generators, and save, we estimate, up to 900 tons of CO2 emissions in the year. So that was a kind of something that we definitely wouldn't have taken on without the funding, but it's absolutely the right thing to do and fits with our trusted custodians values, and something that we kind of really want to showcase as a product that we think, if you produce these plans, you say what you're going to do, follow through and do it, this is the kind of thing that you can deliver. So I'll leave it there. say thank you very much, and hopefully answer any questions that anyone has.